Hello everyone, my name's Tom. A slightly different video from me today. Right off the back of the Grand Prix in Suzuka, I thought I'd do like a little mini review video. I don't know if you guys are kind of up for this sort of thing, but we'll see what the response is. So I'm just going to go through my kind of thoughts and feelings about what happened in Japan from a fantasy perspective. Obviously, I've got some stuff on screen at the moment as a few little talking points that I'm thinking about. Just kind of a general kind of discussion about how the race went. Look at some fantasy assets, look how my team did. Um, he says it's the double DNF, which you'll see shortly. Yeah, painful. Yeah, we'll have a look at how my team did and have a quick little, like, very initial thoughts about what's going on in China ahead of the sprint, the back-to-back sprint races. So yeah, this is just a quick kind of review video. So let's kind of have a look at what the talking points are. First point is that the Red Bulls are on top. In fact, if we just hide this little screen for a bit, bring my team on board at the moment right here on screen. You can see the double DNF on there at the moment. Overall, it's actually a good score for me. If it wasn't for the DNFs are just unfortunate, but we'll talk about it in a bit. Let's talk about the Red Bulls being on top, because we'll click on the constructor themselves to start with. Just look at that column of points. It's immense. The Red Bulls were very consistent throughout the entire weekend in Japan. We know they're strong around there, but it was just so strong from both Verstappen and from Perez. Through the practice sessions, they were dominant. Qualifying, 1-2, race, 1-2. Decent race pace. Obviously, decent. The best race pace. Perez has just been really very impressive so far this season, which was why I kind of went for him in the end of the two times, because Leclerc just wasn't looking sharp through the practice sessions, and I was a bit worried about Ferrari's kind of general pace around here. It looked like a track which they were potentially just not that strong at, even though they turned out to finish third and fourth, so they're still pretty decent considering the track that didn't seem to quite suit them, at least at the beginning of the weekend. So anyway, I went with Perez, which ultimately was kind of fine. I really was kind of hoping I'd get the 1 million rise on him, but I didn't. But anyway, just a 0.3, but we'll take it, I guess. But yeah, Red Bulls, like, look at the pit stop points, just as an example. Fastest pit stop, second fastest pit stop, third fastest pit stop, like the full range of pit stops there from the Red Bulls. I remember watching the race, I remember seeing Verstappen got like a 2.0 pit stop, I think, and Perez had a couple of 2.1s, which is just, yeah, very impressive. So certainly happy I kept hold of them, even though they're not great for budget building, which again, we'll be talking about budget building in a minute as to how that went. Judging by my two DNFs in my team, probably didn't go that well. But yeah, I just purely strong performance from Red Bull. Even though they're not good at building budget, like, just having them in there is just insane, like, just so strong. So yeah, let's bring back the little slide bit. The next thing I want to talk about a little bit is the Haas value, which is why I brought the beautiful faces of Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hülkenberg on the screen here, because they're just smiley people. And Haas have had a rough time of it over the last few years, particularly when you think back to the days of Mazepin and Schumacher. Like, that was, yeah, they really have suffered, but they really have come on this season, and they've been very impressive, and they're very cheap assets. They're kind of ahead of those back markers, and they're consistently bringing these 0.5 price rises. And we throw over to something like caught my eye out of interest. Throw over to the optimal teams over here on F1 Fantasy Tools. If we can just hide that so you can actually see it. Yes, f1fantasytools.com if anyone isn't already aware of it. We look at the optimal teams. This is from Japan. Look how much heavily the Haas feature, and even like the fourth and fifth best teams here, with kind of a max budget of 107-ish. The Haas are actually in there as the second constructor, enabling you to get Sainz as your second driver. Sainz, potentially you could get Leclerc in there if you've got a bit of extra budget. If we just, like, as an example, lower the budget to if you've got slightly less budget than 107, bring it back down, and suddenly the Haas actually become like the optimal team. And I think they scored 20 points, I want to say. I think they scored 20 points in Japan, which isn't fantastic, but when you consider they cost about 7 million, that's really good value for money. And like I said, it enables you to get in the likes of Carlos Sainz or whatever in the rest of your team. So yeah, the Haas are certainly interesting, and it goes further back as well. If we go back to Australia, look at the Haas capabilities here. They feature quite heavily here in the optimal team here. We go back to Saudi Arabia. When it loads. Again, Haas is kind of featuring here, not as a constructor, although they are, further down here you see the Haas as a constructor as well. And all the way back to Bahrain as well, there's some featurette there from the likes of Magnussen, at least, in there. So throughout the season, and sort of growing in in their presence here amongst our teams, the Hases are certainly something interesting, and it's certainly food for thought. Do we want to go with like a Has as like a second constructor? My initial reaction feelings like no, because we see they're scoring 20 points. The Ferraris are scoring like 50 or 60 points. Like clearly we want the Ferraris, right? But the Hases are so cheap. They're just providing such value for money. Particularly, they're going to be super enablers, I think, when it comes to the 3 times DRS, because when you need that second driver to we got sprints coming up, people may well be using 3 times DRS coming up. So Haas has been able to enable you to get in like a Sainz, a Leclerc, or a Perez as a 2 times, whilst you 3 times on Verstappen seems pretty ideal. So yeah, it's interesting, some food for thought there as to how strong the Haas are looking. Let's just throw it back into my little thing here. The other thing I was going to think about was Perez, Sainz, and Leclerc. I had Leclerc from Australia. I switched him to Perez because, like I said already, I just wasn't really confident with Leclerc. But they seem to be very, very even. In fact, again, if we just kind of close this down temporarily, we go to the race results so we can have a look at how they've actually scored over the last few weeks. So you see Leclerc on the first 4, averaging 32, Sainz averaging 34, and Perez averaging 29.2. It's really, really tight. And I feel like when I picked Perez this weekend, it felt like the right decision. It was backed up by his qualifying performance, and the general race performance was great. I mean, Leclerc only kind of matched him because he got that driver of the day, which to some extent was quite fortunate, I guess, for owners. But, he's still up there. The Ferraris have proven that driver of the day is quite a big accolade for them. They keep getting it. So maybe we should just have a Sainz or Leclerc to keep pinning the driver of the day on in our teams. I don't know. So maybe it was wrong of me to jump on Perez in hindsight, because they're just so evenly matched. And if we're not going for the Verstappen build, like Verstappen with stacked on top of the Ferraris and Red Bulls, and perhaps just sticking with someone like a Sainz who seems to be very consistent. It's cheaper amongst the others, so it enables you to build up the rest of your budget guys a bit more. Maybe Sainz going forward actually is just better. He's in really good form, as we know. He's fighting for a seat next season, which I don't think is going to be a problem. He'll have a seat surely in 2025, right? But even so, I think if I don't go for the Verstappen build going forward, then I think Sainz is kind of there. But to be honest, like I've said, they're very, very even. It's much of a muchness. Driver of the days, fastest laps kind of can swing it a little bit here and there. And if it wasn't for driver of the day here, then Leclerc certainly would have been further back, and then my Perez over Leclerc decision would have been much more justified, I guess. But you can't argue. Driver of the day, even love it or hate it in fantasy, I personally don't think it's a great thing for it, but it's there, so we have to deal with it. And I think, going forward, the Perez Leclerc Sainz debate, I'm probably not going to be thinking, if I'm sticking with that team structure, I'm probably not going to be like burning transfers too easily about switching from Perez back to Leclerc or to Sainz or whatever. I'll probably kind of settle probably on a Sainz, maybe just settle on a Perez. I don't know. I haven't decided yet, but going forward, my point is that there's not much to pick between them. However, we may well be going towards the Verstappen meta as it is. Verstappen on top of all the cheap, horrible budget drivers, and in fact, let's bring back the order of the day. The budget dilemma risk, I've kind of labelled it as, because I went for the budget I wanted points, so kind of didn't go all in on budget, but also wanted to build some budget in terms of keeping Lance Stroll. In fact, if we just throw it back to my team, you can see I felt like I could get a good amount of budget from Stroll and Perez, hopefully pinch a bit from Hulkenberg, and hope that Albon and Guan Yu Zhou would just finish the race, and not drop me too many points, but that obviously didn't happen. And I mean, the budget building thing is a bit of a risk, because it's getting that 1 million rise from anyone is actually quite hard. I think I can't remember I haven't got the algorithm up at the moment. I think you need to get like more or less 3 times the average score across the grid. So it's really like depending on the category, obviously. So for like Perez to get that 1 million rise, he needs to be getting kind of pretty much. He came second and he had a bunch of overtakes today, and he still couldn't quite get the million. He was a little bit short. He kind of needs to kind of finish second, potentially get some overtakes and get a driver of the day or get the fastest lap. It just doesn't seem very likely. So actually getting the million rise from someone like Perez, Leclerc or Sainz, it suddenly seems a little bit less likely, and banking on that to try and climb up, improve your budget drivers when you want to move to the Verstappen build. In fact, we moved to my team coming up. So if I wanted to move to a Verstappen build by cutting out all these other guys, I'd literally have to go down to like the cheapest of the cheap, because I've left it a week too late, and now all I can afford basically is this. If I'd done it last week, I would have been able to afford Hulkenberg over Albon. If I'd wildcarded, saved myself 20 points, put Hulkenberg instead of Albon, I would have been sitting pretty here with just the DNF from Guan Yu Zhou. I will say Logan Sargent though is Let me try again. Logan Sargent is one of the kind of main reasons why I didn't actually go with this Verstappen build in the end, because I just have this innate fear that Logan Sargent is going to. Oh my goodness! I just realised I've completely covered this up for this entire time. I apologise. Logan Sargent is one of the reasons why I didn't go with this build, because of his DNF kind of possibility, and he got so lucky, to be honest, in Japan today to not DNF. He got away with it, and he still came away with a price rise, etc. It all looked kind of dandy for him. But going into the gravel, when the cameras switched to him and I saw him in the gravel, I was thinking, oh my goodness, that looks like a DNF. He's kind of beached it, but he managed to somehow reverse out, albeit I don't know if that was potentially a bit dangerous, reversing out into the track even with the yellow flags. But anyway, that's besides the point. Logan Sargent anyway got away with one there. So going forward into China, if I want to go with Team Race, I have to put all this absolute chaff in my team. The Williams that look terrible, the Saubers that just don't look great at all. Guan Yu Zhou getting a DNF because of some gearbox issue. We saw it over the last year as well with Alfa Romeo. Particularly with Bottas having reliability issues kind of rife through the season, and sitting with this doesn't seem great. However, we can see that with my other team, when I had let's just switch it back to I've actually got sort of thing. This team, I've still managed to catch the DNFs in Guan Yu Zhou, Alex Albon. So maybe just ignoring the budget guys, forgetting about Logan Sargent's danger and everything, and just going in with the Verstappen on top of the stack with the 3 times going into the sprint is just the best thing. I'll just use my wild card and save myself whatever is 10, 20 points. I don't know. I don't know if I use my wild card, but anyway, going into China, I'm very torn. I'll talk about my China thoughts in just a second. I'll just flick it back quickly to this, because the last kind of thing is kind of already touched on a bit. DNF minus 20 still sucks, and yes, it does. I've been saying it for like the last year or so that minus 20 is just way too much in my opinion, particularly for sprint races. The points on offer on a sprint race are so minimal, and yet you still get minus 20 for a DNF is just ridiculous. Today it feels bad. I feel like I haven't made any wrong decisions necessarily, but some people will be shouting and be like, you should have just gone with Verstappen, you would have been fine. But I think this team was absolutely fine, and it's completely unlucky. Albon, he had to move out of the way of Ricciardo shimmying across on lap 1. Put his wheel on the grass or touched Ricciardo on the left side there, and went off into the barriers. Completely unavoidable, completely unpredictable, and to get punished minus 20 for that is painful. And likewise, Guan Yu Zhou, gearbox issue, it's just you can't really predict that. I mean, yes, like I said, there were some reliability issues from last year from the Sauber team, and that seems to be still potentially a bit of a thing going into this year. But yeah, the fact that the DNFs are minus 20, it just stings, man. And I know I'm not going to be the only one out there. There'll be other weeks as well where I get lucky. With a team like this, maybe let's just imagine I go with this team in China and all these drivers finish the race, and then people like Sargent and Bottas are getting minus 20s and whatever, and everyone's crying about it. I'm sure it will balance out across the season, but at the moment I just feel bad about it. And it's not even about balancing. It's like, this is a game. It should be about scoring points. I know I'm like going off on a right tangent here about the DNF penalty, but I just think this game should be about scoring points and not making you feel bad when you get the minus 20. You don't just get the minus 20, but you lose the points that they would have gained anyway. You also, from positions gained, for example, you also lose money and value. It's just a lose situation when you get completely random DNF. It's frustrating. And there's my rant for the day. I have a quick look at the actual teams, just very briefly. The Ferraris, like I said already, touched on them. They didn't look great in the practice sessions, but they still had strong race pace. Leclerc pulled off pretty decent result doing that one stop. And then Carlos Sainz also had some good pace to get back on the podium. So yeah, Ferraris look good. I will say this race kind of is to the detriment of McLaren a little bit. I was expecting maybe a little bit better, a little bit closer from the McLarens. They weren't far behind, to be fair. From the likes of Leclerc and Sainz, particularly Norris, who ran a good race. But the fact that Suzuka is supposedly a track that is one of the best suited for the McLaren, it makes me think maybe the McLarens aren't quite there yet. If this is the track that really suits them, and we're going into China, which China has China is a track where quite a lot of straights and stuff, and we know that the McLaren isn't so great in the straight line, and not so much of the high speed stuff in China, from what I can remember of the track. It's been so long since we've been there, but anyway. Which brings me on to my thoughts, actually, thinking about going into China as to whether to run limitless, actually, because it's quite clear at the moment that both Red Bull and Ferrari seem to be the very best and second best. So whilst we know that information, that they are the best and second best, maybe running them is a sensible thing in limitless. And then also running limitless for my team will hopefully mean I can catch more budget with the likes of Lance Stroll and Perez perhaps going up through the sprint races. I don't know, but yeah, limitless is certainly something on my mind in China. As for the Aston Martins, Stroll, I guess you could say disappointing in going out in Q1, but also not that bad because it means overtakes and positions gained. To not get in the top 10 is a bit rough. I think he should have perhaps got in there, but yeah, and Alonso ran a good race as well in the top 10. Kind of never really, kind of kept up to pace with the likes of like Piastri and Russell, kind of in that kind of region. So good effort from Alonso, who we know is a great driver and particularly likes it around Suzuka. Mercedes were disappointing again. Not much to say about them other than like there's some positivity coming out. They seem to have a direction which they've been saying for a long time. So I don't know how much you believe them on that, but George and Lewis just. Really unexciting in terms of fantasy. They're just kind of off my radar at the moment. I will say, yeah, and then we already talked about the Haas, who are impressing in that budget region. The Alpines, they've been labelled the tractor of the grid, and they showed it again. The Alpines in that mix over the first few laps at least were basically just there to offer up overtake points for everyone else because they're just so easy to overtake. Everyone's just shooting past them. So yeah, Alpines. There's a lot of talk about Pierre Gasly being potentially a good enabler for building budget, but I just can't see it. Because he's going to start back, yes, but even if he makes like a few positions because of DNFs, he's going to get like 2 or 3 points. He's not really going to get any overtakes because the Alpine is not quick enough to overtake. He's going to sit like his best is going to be like 2 or 3 points or something. And then he's just going to keep bleeding value. So I actually don't agree with the fact that Gasly's actually good for value anymore. It's kind of off my radar there. The Saubers still had some not great pit stops, but at least there weren't any like 50-second pit stops or anything like that today. So yeah, the Saubers are still kind of whatever. They didn't show great race pace, and also the reliability of Guan Yu Zhou DNFing is a bit of a concern. But it's hard to avoid someone like the Williams and the Saubers, to be honest. Talking about Williams again, kind of this constant damage that they're putting into their cars with Albon crashing again. The Shashi question, will they have enough going into China? I don't know. It's big worrying times, I think, for both Williams and Sauber. So yeah, I'm going to off them as well. And the RBs, Ricardo again, feel a bit sorry for him, to be honest. It's just a bit embarrassing at this point that he's crashed out again, race incident or whatever, but. It's just unfortunate, really. But Tsunoda, on the contrary, finished in the top 10. A good performance from him. Not far off driver of the day vote, so unlucky there, I guess, from Tsunoda owners. But that's kind of it, really. So yeah, I think going into China, I've got kind of 3 things on my initial thoughts. My initial thoughts are kind of go with something like this and just kind of stick with it. Hope the budget continues. The other option is to go with the Verstappen build, which would mean having the literally the absolute chaff in here. Bottas, Sargent and Verstappen in there, and go over this with the sprint races. Just hope I can get as many points as possible from Max, Red Bull and Ferrari. And option 3, which is something very much on my mind, and I need to put a lot more thought into it because using limitless in a sprint race, you only get the FP1 and then you're straight into the deadline, so it's hard to know exactly what's going on in terms of who the best couple of teams are. If I did go limitless, at the moment I'm almost certainly thinking like triple Red Bull, triple Ferrari, and probably either like a Norris or Alonso in that 5th driver spot. So yeah, I am definitely considering limitless because it's a sprint weekend, so you get lots of points. We know that Red Bull and Ferrari are kind of the best teams, although we don't know for sure they're going to be the best teams around China, although I'd expect they would be before upgrades from the likes of McLaren really take form. When we get to Imola, I think the big upgrade from McLaren's coming. So whilst we know and can afford all these Ferraris and Red Bulls, just kind of capitalize on them, I guess. I mean, yeah, in terms of using Limitless, if we know that Ferrari are the second best team, just pile in on them whilst we can. So I am very tempted to use Limitless, and then that obviously, if I use Limitless, that means that my current team here would be the ones that gain or lose budget according to what happens in China, not my Limitless team. So yeah, I can kind of maximize my points in terms of jumping on Red Bulls and Ferraris, whilst also hopefully get a bit of budget gain from the likes of Lance Stroll and Perez. So that's something very much on my mind. So those are kind of the three options. Kind of stick more or less to what I've got. Go Limitless, or just go the Verstappen build with the budget fodder. So that's kind of where I'm at. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts and feelings after Japan. Like I say, I feel a bit miffed about the whole DNS, but you know, you kind of have to take on the chin, because that is the fantasy gods decided that Joe and Alex were gonna cop it today. So yeah, minus 20s for them. But however, you know, despite those minus 20 and minus 40 total from the two of them, still managed to get up to 28k global. So I'm actually sitting fairly pretty. So this time last year I was in like 140k or something. So I'm already like ahead of that game, I guess. So a pretty reasonable start. No means a disaster. I can still afford the Verstappen at the top of the stack build if I want to. I've got lots of options going into China, so that's kind of where we'll leave it for now. We'll pick up in a few days' time. So yeah, thanks very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed the race. It was a pretty good race anyway, wasn't it? Just a shame that there's no real competition for the actual victory, but there we go. And I'll be back for actual team selection video soon. Don't know when. Soon. Thanks for listening, and catch you soon. Bye.